Benton was crying, loudly and dramatically, just enough to be annoying. I knew it. You're embarrassing yourself, says Sanderford, sipping his coffee. I knew it, Benton repeated. Across the table, Nate smiled serenely into his tea. Keeble pointed accusingly. Look at him. What? He's glowing. Nate blinked. I am not. You absolutely are. He kinda is, Sanderford admitted. I hate all of you. No, you don't. Lionel reached across the table without thinking and stole a piece of fruit from Nate's plate. Nate immediately pushed the entire plate toward him. The room exploded. Oh my gods. Did you see that? He surrendered the plate. Voluntarily. That's courtship behavior. It's a piece of fruit. It's symbolic fruit. And without missing a beat. So when's the wedding? Keeble asked. Lionel threw a bread roll at his head. Unfortunately, he hit. Keeble yelped. Benton applauded. Nate looked delighted. Sanderford snorted. Then he said, well, whenever it is, I hope it's before the nobility finds out. The table quieted. Lionel frowned. What nobility? The Seraphin kind. Nate sighed. Oh, that was not an encouraging oh. Lionel immediately sat straighter. What does that mean? Nate waved a hand. It means some people will complain. About what? About everything. Nate says it lightly. Lionel does not react lightly. Who? Nate hesitates. It's a small thing, but Lionel noticed, because now he's paying attention. Scene 5. Hair care. The room was quiet except for the crackle of the hearth and the soft hiss of rain against the tall windows. Lionel sat heavily at the edge of the bed, elbows on his knees, turning a small glass bottle between rough fingers. Camellia oil. Expensive. Fragrant. Apparently necessary, according to Nate, for proper maintenance. Lionel still thought that was ridiculous. Behind him, Nate laughed softly, like he could hear the thought without being told. You're glaring at the oil again. I'm glaring at the fact your hair has more upkeep than a royal warhorse. It's longer than a warhorse's mane. That ain't helping your argument, Angel. Another laugh. Softer this time. Lionel glanced back over his shoulder. Nate sat cross-legged near the headboard in a loose sleeping robe, pale blue fabric slipping low enough to expose one shoulder. His hair spilled around him in shimmering waves, silver-white and almost translucent in the firelight. It reached well past his waist now that it was unbound. It looked unreal spread across the dark blankets, like moonlight poured into silk. It also looked impossible to maintain. Lionel still remembered the first time he saw Seraphin hair up close. He had genuinely thought Nate's braid was glowing. Now he knew better. Not glowing. Just alive. Seraphin hair caught light strangely, like threads of spun glass. Their priests claimed it was because their gods breathed blessings into every strand at birth. Lionel didn't know about all that, but he did know Seraphins treated hair with a reverence bordering on worship. And Nate trusted Lionel with his. That realization still did strange things to his chest. You're staring, Nate murmured. You're pretty. Deal with it. Pink touched Nate's ears immediately. Lionel smirked faintly and uncorked the oil bottle. Come here. Nate obeyed without hesitation, sliding down the mattress until his back rested against Lionel's chest. Easy, familiar, like he belonged there. Maybe he did. Lionel swallowed hard once and forced himself to focus. The first few times he had helped with Nate's hair, his hands had been clumsy. Seraphin hair tangled differently from Nephilim hair, finer, softer, almost slippery between his fingers. Now he had learned its weight, learned the feel of it sliding across his knuckles, learned how Nate melted whenever Lionel scratched lightly at his scalp. Learned too much, maybe. Nate relaxed as soon as Lionel began combing his fingers carefully through the pale strands. There, Nate sighed quietly. That good? Mm-hmm. Spoiled thing. Lionel gathered the shimmering lengths over one shoulder and worked oil slowly through the ends. The scent of camellias bloomed warm between them. Nate's head tipped back incrementally against his shoulder. Trusting. Always so damn trusting with him. Nate had stopped pretending the attention didn't mean something. Months ago Lionel had wanted to touch this hair. Now Nate practically fell asleep whenever he worked oil through it. Funny how life turned out. You know, Lionel muttered, where I'm from, if someone asked you to do all this, people would think you're married already. We practically are, Lionel choked. Nate looked entirely unrepentant. You cannot just say shit like that without warning. But it's true. We're courting. Yes, Nate said serenely. Aggressively. Lionel barked out a startled laugh despite himself. Then his fingers paused. Near Nate's temple, hidden beneath the pale silver strands, something caught the firelight differently. Darker. Lionel frowned slightly and separated the hair carefully. At the roots, just above Nate's ear, a thin streak of color threaded through the silver. Red, not bright, not vivid yet, but unmistakably copper red beneath the gold firelight. Lionel went still. Nate felt it immediately. "Lionel? You—" His voice came out rough. Nate turned slightly, trying to look, but Lionel's hand instinctively slid to the side of his neck, stopping him gently. "Don't move." The words came out quieter than intended. Nate obeyed instantly. Lionel stared at the strand. A memory surfaced suddenly, one of Nate's old stories about seraphim bonds. Hair changing color over years, sometimes months, sometimes only after vows, sometimes before. The deeper the devotion, the stronger the change. His pulse thudded heavily. "Nate," he said slowly, "how fast does it usually happen?" Silence, then very carefully, "What happened?" Lionel lifted the thin lock between two fingers. Nate inhaled sharply. For a moment neither of them spoke. The tiny ribbon of red glimmered softly amid the silver-white strands. Heat crawled slowly up Nate's throat. "Oh," that tiny sound nearly undid Lionel completely. "Oh," Lionel repeated incredulously. Nate looked genuinely flustered now, eyes wide and darting everywhere except Lionel's face. "Well," he said weakly, "that's perhaps sooner than expected." "Sooner? It usually takes quite some time for visible changes." Lionel stared at him. "Nate." The seraphim finally looked up. Lionel had seen Nate face monsters, nobles, battlefield horrors, and divine magic without flinching. But this? This made him shy. Warmth burst painfully through Lionel's ribs. "Hey," he murmured. Nate's expression softened immediately at the tone. Lionel brushed the red strand back gently behind Nate's ear. His fingertips lingered there against warm skin. "That's me." Nate huffed a quiet laugh, embarrassed beyond belief now. "No," he deadpanned softly. "Obviously, I'm secretly bonding with your cousin." Lionel snorted loudly, then his expression changed. The humor faded into something deeper. Hungrier, softer, reverent. He looked at the red strand again, like it was something sacred. "You're keeping it," he said. Nate blinked. "What?" "You heard me." Lionel gathered Nate's hair carefully, protecting the colored strand with absurd gentleness. No cutting it off, no hiding it either. A slow flush spread across Nate's cheeks. "Possessive," he murmured. "Very." Nate smiled then, small, helpless, beautiful. Lionel leaned down before he could think too hard about it and pressed a kiss just behind Nate's ear, right beside the red streak. Nate shivered hard against him. The reaction went straight through Lionel like a blade. His arms tightened instinctively around Nate's waist. "Gods," Lionel muttered against his skin, voice rough with wonder. "You really are mine now, huh?" Nate's breath caught, not because of the possessiveness, because Lionel sounded awed, like he'd been handed something precious, something he hadn't dared ask for, something he still couldn't quite believe was his. Nate turned in his arms then, slow and deliberate, until they were face to face on the edge of the bed. The fire painted gold across Nate's pale lashes, across the blush warming his cheeks, across the tiny streak of red hidden in silver hair. Not silver anymore, Lionel realized suddenly. Changing, choosing him back. Nate touched their foreheads together gently. "Yes," he whispered. "I think I am." The mission had been insultingly easy. Retrieve the artifact, map minor structural changes in the lower corridors, and return before nightfall. Routine. "Careful with that," said Lionel. "I'm being careful," replied Benton, readjusting the strap of the reinforced bag carrying the artifact. "You're not being careful." "I am. Look, I'm not dropping the artifact." "You dropped your lunch yesterday," deadpanned Sandiford. That was unrelated. After 3 days underground, 2 collapsed tunnels, and 1 near-fatal argument about maps, Benton had expected something impressive. Instead, it looked like an oddly shaped lump of crystal wrapped in ancient bronze. He was deeply offended. "You know," he said, shifting the reinforced carrying bag on his shoulder, "for something that nearly got us killed, this thing is disappointingly ugly." "It's a magical artifact," Sandiford replied. "It's a rock," Lionel added. "I have heard that before," said Keeble, which made most squamates laugh in unison. Nate smiles at that. The others had somehow become even more insufferable since the birthday, especially Keeble. Every time Nate and Lionel stood within 5 feet of each other, somebody made a comment. Every single time, Nate hid another smile behind one hand. Lionel bumped his shoulder lightly, and Nate's smile immediately widened. Benton made a strangled noise. Gods, they're adorable. I'll kill you. You say that every day. And one day I'll mean it. Suddenly the air changed, a subtle change of pressure. Every soldier in the platoon felt it instantly. The tunnel widened ahead, and another expedition appeared around the next corner. 8 people. They were armed and appeared professional, military by the looks of it. And Seraphins mostly. Everyone stopped. Silence settled instantly. The artifact bag suddenly felt much heavier. The opposing team's eyes landed on it immediately, right through Benton. Then on the squad. Weapons remained sheathed for now. Well, Keeble muttered quietly, that's unfortunate. Stay sharp, Lionel ordered. The squad shifted formation automatically. Years of practice. Benton moved back. Sandiford widened his stance. Keeble stopped smiling, and Lionel stepped slightly in front of Nate without thinking. The movement was small, instinctive. But Nate noticed. Then the opposing group's leader spoke. That artifact belongs to the kingdom of Aurelis. Funny, Lionel replied. We found it first. Several hands drifted toward weapons. The tension tightened. Nobody wanted a fight, but everybody looked willing to have one. Then one of the opposing soldiers frowned. His gaze lingered on Nate. A few seconds passed, then his eyes widened. Lord Benito? Silence. Every head turned toward Nate, including Lionel's. Nate closed his eyes briefly. The sigh that escaped him carried years of accumulated inconvenience. Right. Keeble blinked. Right? The opposing team looked significantly less confident now. Their leader swallowed. Hard. Lord Nathan Benito, he repeated, the chosen heir of Soyis. Keeble made a choking sound. Sandiford nearly dropped his staff. Benton looked delighted. Lionel frowned. Nate looked vaguely embarrassed. That title makes it sound much more dramatic than it is. The opposing soldiers stared at him like he had just claimed reign was a mild inconvenience. Lionel's frown deepened. Nate? Yes? What title? Nate hesitated, not because he wanted to hide it, because he was clearly trying to figure out how much explanation was required. Unfortunately for him, the opposing soldier volunteered. The future high priest of the Temple of Soyis. The dungeon fell silent. The future what? Nate looked at Lionel, then winced slightly. The future high priest. Benton raised a hand. Question. Across from them, the opposing team remained noticeably tense. One of them finally spoke. It is really you. The atmosphere changed slightly. Nate's expression became more serious. Not cold, not arrogant, simply honest. Yes, the answer landed heavily. The opposing team exchanged glances. Nobody looked eager anymore, because everyone understood what that meant. Not noble blood, not politics, not inheritance, worthiness. Luminance affinity was measured by the temple, tested and proven. The Temple of Soyis did not choose weak candidates, and it certainly did not choose ordinary ones. The title of High Priest was earned. Every single Seraphim present knew that. The opposing leader exhaled slowly, then stepped back. His team followed immediately. No discussion, no argument, no challenge, just a professional assessment of terrible odds. We will withdraw. Keeble blinked. That's it? The leader looked at him, then at Nate, then back at him. We will not fight a future high priest of Soyis over a relic. The leader's gaze shifted past Nate to Lionel, still standing slightly in front of him, still between Nate and a potential threat. The man blinked. Are you protecting him? The question caught Lionel completely off guard. What? The man looked genuinely puzzled now. You stepped in front of Lord Benito. Yeah, why? You got a problem with that? Nate is trying not to smile at that, because everyone is confused about different things. The opposing team departed shortly afterward. Once they disappeared down the corridor, silence lingered. Then everybody slowly turned toward Nate. Nate looked mildly alarmed. Lionel folded his arms. Nathan Benito. Yes? Explain this. You are a future high priest. Potentially. You forgot to mention this. I didn't forget. You absolutely forgot. It genuinely never came up. It came up just now. Benton was vibrating with excitement. Sandiford looked vindicated. Keeble looked betrayed. Lionel mostly looked annoyed. Nate knew him well enough to see the concern hidden underneath. They continued their path out the dungeon. So, when nobody else was paying attention, Nate nudged his shoulder lightly against Lionel's. The annoyance immediately softened. Just a little. Only Nate would have noticed. Unfortunately, the squad noticed everything. Benton pointed. There. Oh, for fuck's sake, Lionel groaned. Did you see that? We all saw that. Nate looked down to hide his smile. Again. But he was starting to worry. Maybe he really upset Lionel. So he explained without prompting. Because there was nothing to hide. When I was 5, the priests of Soyuz determined that my affinity was unusually high. Unusually? Benton repeated. Nate looked embarrassed. Exceptionally high. That's why I was encouraged to learn about healing in general. Medicine, pharmacy, magic, all of it. And I was good at it. So they chose you? Sandiford asked. Nate nodded. Eventually. Is it because of your family? He asked again. No. Among Seraphins, positions like this aren't inherited because of blood. We are a few to be chosen and become heir. We do not inherit the seat alone. But I was given the title of High Priest because my magic was among the highest. Nate shrugged. The temple chooses who it believes is worthy. Lionel immediately likes this system more than Nephilim nobility, even if he'll never admit it. You should have told me. Nate looked genuinely surprised. Would it have changed anything? Lionel stared at him. The question seemed ridiculous. Of course not. Nate blinked. Lionel folded his arms. You're still Nate. For a moment the dungeon became very quiet, because that's the answer Nate wanted. But then Keeble piped, Hold on, everyone groans. No, your boyfriend is a future high priest. Yes, and your first reaction was, why didn't you tell me? You didn't even ask how powerful he is. Lionel snorts, I've seen him patch Sandiford back together after a wyvern attack. Pause. Frankly, that was enough. They found themselves once again in Nate's room. A fire crackled softly in the hearth, filling the space with a gentle warmth. Come sit here so I can do your hair, Lionel said, settling himself on the edge of the bed. Nate watched him for a moment, a soft smile lingering on his lips, before he complied. You seem to have developed quite a taste for this. I'm taking care of you, that's all. Now sit. Nate had no objection to that. Lately, Lionel had been the only one allowed to touch his hair. Nate suspected it had something to do with Lionel wanting to monitor the gradual change in color. Honestly, he had been surprised by how quickly his hair had responded to Lionel. But magic did not lie. Lionel had taken it upon himself to care for Nate's hair. It wasn't about appearance. Not really. He poured a little oil into his palm before working it carefully through Nate's hair, strand by strand, from root to tip. Nate sat cross-legged on the floor between Lionel's legs, quietly humming an unfamiliar tune. The bond between them grew stronger with every passing day. Lionel could see it in the changing color of Nate's hair. During his research into Seraphim customs, he had learned that their hair was considered an extension of their magic. The change in color was not merely symbolic, it was the visible sign of magic being shared between two bodies. The courtship has been very pleasant, you know, Nate said with a smile. Lionel didn't stop. If anything, his fingers moved more slowly as he began massaging Nate's scalp. If you say so. There is one thing missing, though. This time Lionel froze, his eyes frowning. Nate tilted his head back to look up at him upside down. I don't think you kiss me often enough. Idiot, Lionel barked. Nate burst out laughing. I thought I'd actually done something wrong. His laughter stopped abruptly when Lionel cupped his face with both hands. The movement was so sudden that Nate blinked in surprise. Then Lionel leaned down and pressed a gentle kiss to his lips. For a heartbeat, Nate remained perfectly still. Then he melted into it. The room seemed to grow quieter around them. The fire crackled softly in the background while they lingered there, forehead to forehead, sharing the kind of closeness that no longer felt uncertain. Lionel brushed a thumb across Nate's cheek. There. Happy now? Nate smiled. A little? A little? I might need additional reassurance. Lionel groaned. Nate's smile widened immediately. Somehow, Lionel thought this was entirely his own fault. He dove in again to kiss him. Lionel's skin was starting to light up. His skin markings rarely appeared out of combat, but Nate's presence tended to make them more active lately. Nate paused, not because he was uncertain, because he wanted to look. Lionel spent so much of his life in motion, charging, protecting, fighting, working. It felt strangely rare to have him still, to have all of his attention, to have all of him. Suddenly, Nate pulled back to turn around and face him fully. He was kneeling in between Lionel's legs. He put his hands on his betrothed's thighs and asked softly, Can I try something else today? Lionel didn't need to know the details. Whatever you want. Nate smiled and leaned back up to start kissing him again. He climbed on the bed, dragging Lionel with him in the middle of it. He pulled Lionel's tunic up and out of the way before pushing him down. He takes a moment to admire the view under him. Lionel had his abdomen and torso on full display, his red hair hollowed on the pillow below. And he was looking at him with lust. He was straddling this powerful man and was feeling wanted. Cherished, he went back down and kissed his torso right on his heart. Relishing the way Lionel threw his head back on his pillow. Lionel's hand came up to tangle in Nate's hair, caressing the strands with reverence, with closed eyes and open mouth. So responsive, Nate thought. He knew which scars are old, which scars nearly killed him, which injuries Lionel still favors unconsciously. He even knew which one he healed personally. Lionel was awed at Nate's ministrations, like he knew what he was thinking, what he was remembering at each touch of a scar. Nate sat squarely on Lionel's erection and grounded his ass down. Lionel opened his eyes to look up at him. There is a lazy heat coiling up inside him now. Something new, something reserved for Nate. Lionel's stare was making Nate a bit giddy. He started to move his hips, small sensual circles, designed to stimulate Lionel rather than himself. He was moving in slow sensual circles, his eyes half open and looking down at Lionel with something like pride when he felt him twitch beneath him. He lifted his head, showing his neck and flaring deliberately his skin markings. He licks his lips, watching the way Lionel track his every movement. He was putting on a show, he knew that. But he couldn't help himself. He felt seen by this man, and he wanted to give himself completely. He grinds down again. "Can I suck you off?" Lionel choked on his own spit, and Nate felt absolutely validated. Yes, fuck," Lionel panted. Nate leaned down and kissed him again before trailing kisses down his throat, following Lionel's markings down to his chest, taking his time, observing every reaction he got out of Lionel, swirling his tongue and tasting the skin before kissing again. Lionel was keeping himself perfectly still, letting Nate do whatever he wanted, and letting himself feel Nate's undivided attention. Nate kept journeying down Lionel's body until he got his hands on his trousers. He loosened and took them off before taking a comfortable place between Lionel's spread thighs. He leaned down, taking a breath and smelling the masculine smell of him. "Finally," he murmured, "the moment is almost sacred for him." Lionel didn't do touch. It's not that he was a private person, but touch is something he considers intimate. He tolerates backpats from his teammates, but not much else. Those who had tried had learned a hard lesson. But here he was, naked, on his back, on Nate's bed, letting him set the pace of their relation. Courting Nate in that direct way of his. Nate was getting drunk on this. He started squirming. He took Lionel's dick in his hand and gave it a few tugs. Lionel inhaled sharply. Yes, they were both breathing hard, Lionel from the sensation and Nate from Lionel's reaction. "You are beautiful like this," Nate said quietly, mesmerized by the noises his mate was making and the writhing he was seeing. Lionel was trying to stay still, but he was failing. Nate could feel Lionel watching him, not looking, watching, as though every movement mattered. Then Nate leaned forward and licked the tip of his erection while keeping eye contact with Lionel. This time, a groan escaped Lionel. "Nate," he pleaded, while Nate repeated the motion several times, that tone. A pleading tone that he never heard before. Nate decided right there that no one else will ever hear that of Lionel. He took Lionel's dick in his mouth and started moving slowly over it. It's big and uncomfortable, but Lionel was making delicious noise above him, and he did not want to stop. He sucked it harder, taking more in his mouth before retreating and dragging his tongue on the underside of his dick. "Fuck, oh fuck, Nate." Lionel was breathing loudly now, moaning through most exhale. His hands were clutching the sheets, he was sweating. Nate stopped his ministration to say, "Touch my hair." "Fuck, Nate." His hands reached up to bury his hands in Nate's hair and used that grip to pull him back down on himself. Earning a surprised moan from Nate. Delighted, he took him back in his mouth and resumed his pleasuring, and Lionel was lost again. He was clutching Nate's hair, tugging on strands before releasing and caressing them, trying to detangle the mess he just made before pulling on them again. He was nearing the edge. Nate could hear it through his moans getting louder. He could feel it through the contact of his hair. He felt powerful. He bobbed his head faster and deeper, urging Lionel to go higher and higher in his ecstasy. Suddenly, he felt Lionel pull hard on his hair before choking a warning. "I am going to... Nate!" He tries to pry Nate of his dick, but he goes down deeper on it while moaning his approval. Nate stopped tugging on his hair and started jerking his own hips rapidly. He came with a shout in Nate's mouth while he was sucking hard on an upstroke. He kept him in his mouth while still moving his hands, milking every reaction out of Lionel. Lionel had his eyes rolled back, his chest rising of the mattress. He was twitching, straining, trying not to jostle Nate. He was breathing heavily, moaning again and again with each movement of Nate's hand. It was starting to become too much. His hips were jerking wildly, his thighs spreading and closing. Nate was still jerking him off. He released Lionel's dick, swallowing, and was intensely looking at Lionel's reactions. He knew it was probably uncomfortable at this point, but Lionel let him do as he pleased. Nate, it's... He finally stopped, letting Lionel take a breather. But then he reached down and took his own cock out before straddling Lionel's chest and jerking off. Lionel startled. "Look at me." He was putting on a show again. For Lionel, he closed his eyes and felt Lionel's hands on his hips, steadying him, caressing him. "Come for me." His voice was noticeably lower and gravelly. He was coaxing Nate to let go. That was all it took for him. He came right above Lionel, a silent cry on his parted lips. His thighs trembled as he spilled messy ropes of cum on Nate's chest. He collapsed on top of Nate, feeling floaty, breathless. Lionel gathers him in his arms, unbothered by the mess on themselves. He tucked his head under his chin. After a minute, Lionel rolled his hips, pinned Nate under him, and kissed him passionately. Nate couldn't even think straight yet. He could only reach Lionel's back shakily. "I really love you, Lionel," Nate said when they parted. Lionel swallowed hard. This was not the time to deflect or make a joke. Nate saw his hesitation. "It's okay, you don't have to say anything. I just wanted to say it." They did have a dangerous way of life. Their last raid in the dungeon proved that. Lionel had already told himself that he wouldn't take this for granted, but this was hard. He pressed another kiss. Still in awe that he was allowed to do this now. He was allowed to reach out, to touch, to kiss, and more. He would never take this for granted. "We should probably clean up a bit," said Nate lightly when it started to get sticky between them. He pulled back but was stopped abruptly by Lionel's hand on his face, turning it back in his direction. "I fucking love you too, idiot." The smile and answering shimmer of white markings along Nate's skin was blinding, but he decided that putting it there would be one of his life goals from now on.